Hi, welcome to the Midnight Sermon. This is the Unnamed, part 2. It's a different story, but part 2 in a series of 2. We looked last time at the woman who assassinated Abimelech, who was the evil chieftain. And we're going to stay in the Old Testament. We're just going to jump on a couple of chapters, because as you may know, I'm a big fan of the Old Testament in all its weird, mystical, challenging fantasticness. One of the things that we do at our place, which I like to call advanced spirituality, is not to just do the standard stuff that gets churned out. We do need to know that, but we also need to look at the underbelly of the biblical story, because often that's really where the reality is. Really where the reality is? Yeah, that works, I think. Because we've been fed this diet of standardized Christianity, very often Western European, and we miss all these people that make up this great story, and we focus it down to a very narrow field, and you end up often spiritualizing everything, and you lose that kind of rawness. So we're back in that today. And we also learn that sometimes the Bible shows us how not to behave, or it shows us how to behave by showing us people who behaved in ways they shouldn't have behaved. And this isn't to do with some kind of pure ritual law. This is to do with being a good human being. Almost whatever you believe, as we find out a few episodes back, we looked at Zephaniah, and how God was bothered about how everyone behaved, because everyone is part of God's creation. So some of the Old Testament stuff is difficult, isn't it? And that's, again, because the way we're conditioned, we don't read the Bible with different eyes and with different voices. It's the breathed word of God to be breathed in and out, and the stories will shift and change as the world changes, and as we change too. So some of the Old Testament stuff, the genocide and the claiming the land, well, once you read it in this century, some of that rings quite uncomfortable, doesn't it? Perhaps God is saying, well, look what happened when people did behave like that, when people thought this is what God wanted. Imagine being in a country that someone claims is theirs and they invade you and take you over. All of a sudden, the story of the taking of the promised land reads very different. If you have a disability, the stories of Jesus healing, how he treated people with disabilities, take on a very different hue. And it's not always comfortable. So advanced spirituality means we take this stuff head on and we say, well, what on God's earth is going on here? Now, we can retreat to some of the more comfortable stuff for a bit of respite, but if we only read the easy stuff, you're not getting a balanced diet, are you? You get out of condition. So here we go with one of the most horrendous Old Testament stories. Not the most horrendous. I'm avoiding that one. But here is the story of Jephthah's daughter, who never ever gets named. This is not a story for Sunday school. It's going to get dark, but if we're Bible-based, we need to shine a light into some of these dark pages. And in the words of the prophet Yoda, afraid you will be. We'll do some nice stuff another week. Let me read it to you. I'm going to read from Judges, the book of Judges, chapter 11. Jephthah the Gileadite was a tough warrior. He was the son of a prostitute, but Gilead was his father. Meanwhile, Gilead's legal wife had given him the other sons, and when they grew up, his wife's sons threw Jephthah out. They told him, You're not getting any of our family inheritance. You're the son of another woman." So Jephthah fled from his brothers and went to live in the land of Tob. Some riffraff joined him and went around with him. Some time passed, and then the Ammonites started fighting Israel. With the Ammonites at war with them, the elders of Gilead went to Jephthah from the land of Tob. They said to Jephthah, "Come, be our general, and we'll fight the Ammonites." Jephthah then has this conversation and says, "Well, why should I? You hate me. But I'll do it if you make me your chief." So they agree. And then Jephthah goes to the Ammonites and tries to negotiate with them, but they don't want to know. And they end up going to war. The king of the Ammonites refused to listen to a word that Jephthah had sent him. God's spirit came upon Jephthah. He went across Gilead and Manasseh, went through Mizpah of Gilead, and from there he approached the Ammonites. Jephthah made a vow before God. "If you give me a clear victory over the Ammonites, then I'll give God whatever comes out the door of my house to meet me when I return in one piece from the Ammonites. I'll offer it up as a sacrificial burnt offering." Then Jephthah was off to fight the Ammonites, and God gave them to him. He beat them soundly. 20 cities, a massacre, Ammonites brought to their knees by the people of Israel. Jephthah came home to Mizpah. His daughter ran from the house to welcome him home, dancing to tambourines. She was his only child. He had no son or daughter except her. When he realized who it was, he ripped his clothes, saying, "Ah, dearest daughter, I'm dirt. I'm despicable. My heart is torn to shreds. I made a vow to God, and I can't take it back." She said, "Dear father, if you made a vow to God, do to me what you vowed." God did his part and saved you from the Ammonite enemies. And then she said to her father, "But let this one thing be done for me. Give me 2 months to wander through the hills and lament my virginity, since I will never marry, I and my dear friends." "Oh yes, go," he said. He sent her off for 2 months. She and her dear friends went among the hills, lamenting that she would never marry. At the end of the 2 months, she came back to her father. He fulfilled the vow with her that he'd made. She had never slept with a man. It became a custom in Israel that for 4 days every year the young women of Israel went out to mourn for the daughter of Jephthah, the Gileadite. Now at the moment, I'm reading Folk, which is the title of the book, very short. The book isn't. But the book Folk is a collection of short stories by Zoe Gilbert. And it's very interesting. I'm also, at the same time, as you can tell, reading the book of Judges, which is a book by the Bible. And this week, as I said, it's getting dark because it was a troubled time. People did what they wanted. There was no king, there were no laws. There were rituals and honour and customs and tribes, tradition. There was the covenant law somewhere around. But even God's priests, the Levites, went rogue and served in private households. They worshipped before gods made of silver. They wore ephods that had been fashioned for them by strangers. God didn't care. It was wild times, dark times. Tribes were butchered by their brother tribes. Wives were taken from within and without acceptable tribal lines. Women were stolen to replace the slaughtered, just to keep the tribe alive. It was a time of the judges, the chief of all the tribes, and they would kill with their bare hands for lust, take a wife, burn settlements, send foxes of fire through their fields. It was a dark time, and God looked on. And as the story unfolded, with his arms folded, as there was no king, people did what they wanted. It was a dark time, wild and untamed. The only law seemed to be the voice of God through the tribe, unchecked, without walls, without government. Men, and I mean men, tried to contain their own darkness, lust and murder and desire and power, hunger. They developed this idea of women, this icon of womanhood, pure and obedient and submissive and virginal and compliant. They wrote stories of dark deeds and of a patriarchal God that stood in the shadows, in smoke-filled rooms or smoke-filled tents, approving the dark deeds that went on. There were no kings. Have I mentioned this? It was a wild, untamed time. The people did what they wanted. So they created this unassailable image of purity and naivety, of goodness, of chastity. And women were it, the only pure thing in this world. And in doing this, they allowed their own excesses: murder, revenge, trafficking, sexual slavery, hypocrisy. The darkness of the acts was somehow dissolved in the light of pure womanhood, virginal, untouched, pure light. And in the defense of this icon, this idol, this prison of bars for women, in the alleged defense of this vulnerable, virginal idea, they justified horrendous acts of physical, emotional, and sexual violence. But it was wild, untamed times. Cities were isolated with endless desert around them. Allies were days' marches away. Demons and marauders in the hills and on the roads, in the shadows beyond the firelight, and in the dark recesses of their own souls. So welcome to the Book of Judges.